Welcome to Live Free. I'm Angela K. Austin. Together, we'll discuss books, we'll explore the world, and we'll do it with some of my closest friends. And hopefully, we'll make new ones along the way.
Hey, everybody, this is Angela K. Austin, and today I'm here with Savannah J. Frierson. Hey, Savannah, say hi to everybody.
Hi.
All right. Okay, so today, Savannah and I are going to talk to you guys a little bit about proofreading and copy edits, help you understand the differences in some of these different types of editing or different steps of editing. So one of the reasons I wanted to have this conversation with Savannah is, again, you guys know this podcast, one of its main things or conversation points is all about self-publishing in the indie publishing world. And whenever I'm talking to other indie authors out there, they're always looking for ways to get their product out there at the cheapest cost or with the least amount of expense, I should say. And so one of the things that often gets missed are the different steps in editing. And so I wanted to have this conversation with Savannah because not only is she a self-pub author, but she's also an author who offers services in that realm of editing. So I wanted to have this conversation with somebody who not only is doing or living that self-pub, indie pub life, but she's also in that world of editing. So I wanted to have this conversation so she and I can really share with you the importance of this part of editing. So Savannah, I want you to kind of share with everybody a little bit about who you are as a writer, and what you do as a proofreader, copy editor. And then, we can get more into the nuances of what proofreading and copy editing, line edits, what that really means.
Okay. So, like it's been said, my name is Savannah J. Frierson, and I have been publishing primarily romance and women's fiction since 2007. And I started as a proofreader / editor in 2003, mainly because I did not want to come home from college. And there was a job at a major academic publisher near where I went to school. And so I started doing that job every summer from my sophomore year until about 2009 when I moved back home to South Carolina. And from there, I would do some content edits for a lot of indie electronic publishers that most of them are shuttered now, but I kind of honed my craft in terms of instead of academic works, I went to fiction. And then now I do a combination of fiction and nonfiction again. And I am a copy editor and proofreader for major publishers as well as individual authors and universities and all sorts of other people. So, anybody who wants to work with me, I do my best to make sure that we are compatible to work with and that they leave with far more information than when they came in with. Because I think editing is not just about correcting your manuscript, but it's also learning how to become a better and more confident author and have more confidence in your own writing. So I really try to make sure that, when you end your relationship with me for that project, that you feel good about what I've helped you create.
Now, that's a good point, because I think that over the years that I've been doing this, and you and I have been doing this for about the same amount of time, I've been doing this about 12, 13 years as well. Nope. Yeah.
Yeah.
Get my dates right. Yeah, my years right. And that's one of the things, because one of the things I always share with new authors is that when you are ready to release that book, whether it's your first one or your 20th one, there's that little bit of kind of trepidation. You're a little nervous about letting it go and putting it in front of somebody else, and you start to, think extra hard about everything. Now, is this the best quality? Is this, did I cover everything I wanted to cover, do everything I wanted to do? And, is every word right, every sentence right, what about the scene endings? What about the chapter beginnings? Everything is racing through your mind because you're trying to figure out if you have the best work out there that you can possibly create. And like you said, the more I work with the members of the team that I've created, the more confident I feel in it, about the work that I've done. So I believe editing is an incredibly important step in the writing process. But I know a lot of people, because when you're putting those first couple of books out there, especially that first one, you just may not have the dollars to throw behind it, So it's like, how many things can you do yourself that you don't have to farm out to someone else is really what's going through your mind. You're trying to figure out that, that return on your investment, But I always tell people, if there's nothing else, really try to figure out how you can work with someone, who can help you make that story the tightest story. So let's talk about some of those elements of editing. So like I said, one of the reasons I wanted to invite you here was because I knew that you did proofreading and copy edits. But, honestly, to the person who doesn't know what that means, let's kind of talk about that. Let's talk about what that means, because there are all these steps to editing, and you and I were talking about it a little bit, offline. But when people think about paying for editing, or even when they just think about the steps of editing, I think about that, that kind of funnel, that you and I were talking about. You can do it in this broad way, with these, this manuscript critique, which a lot of people do. A lot of people pay for that. It may not be as expensive, but that gives you this overall kind of view of what's happening with your book or your story. And then you can go in and you can do all these other levels that makes your story a tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter story, right? So let's kind of go through this, looking at the different pieces that you offer services with them, and so you offer services along the proofreading and the copy edits, and you also do some line edits, right?
Yes.
Okay. So then let's start kind of, I guess, in reverse.
Right.
Because if we were looking at this, from top down, we look at it from like this manuscript critique, this big broad thing, or we would look at these comprehensive or line edits, this content kind of situation. Then we would go from there with copy edits and proofreading. So let's talk about proofreading. Tell us what that means, what that looks like.
So ideally, proofreading is done when you have the book or the manuscript formatted as you would like for it to go to press or to market. So ideally, a proofreader would look at the story as you want it to be in terms of, like, if it's a ebook, you're giving the proofreader how it is in the format of the ebook. But I know most people don't do that. So it's okay if you have to give your proofreader the final form in the Word document or the manuscript file, if that's the way you can do it. Because I know some people are a little bit tricky, are still trying to figure out how do you send, an arc of the ebook, or, it might, especially if you're working with KDP, you can't send a print book. You can do a proof book, but you can't send it's a whole thing. But the point is that the proofreader is looking at the product as like a quality assurance check. So they're verifying that everything follows the style sheet that was given. All the errors have been caught as much as humanly possible. Everything looks the way it's supposed to look. So they're not doing any edits. Edits are done. There are no more edits. Everything that's being checked for now are the typos, are the stray periods and question marks, the weird formatting, it's supposed to be flush left and all of a sudden everything is centered. Like, that's what they're looking for, to make sure that the file that's going to be sent out to the public is the correct format, as free of typos, as free of misspelled words, as free of any lingering errors as possible. That's what the proofreading stage is for.
And it's interesting that you say that, because with my beta readers, I often send them a PDF because I don't, want to send them something that is just a basic Word document. But when I do have people who are proofreading, I do like to send them an actual kind of ebook format. I don't often send them a print book format. I send the ebook format, but I use a software. And on my YouTube channel, I'm going to have a video about that software. But it's a software that helps me with compilation so that I can create that ebook, so that I can, not only load that final product up to my distributor, but so that I can also use it as needed for other things. So that's very interesting, that you mentioned that, because when we were talking about that earlier, I like that, because oftentimes when you're compiling and you're pulling that book together, you get these errant, like, blank pages and all this other stuff, and
right.
Things pop up that you never even noticed. So proofreading it in the final format does allow you to see it, because you looked at it so many different times in a Word document or whatever you're using, if you're using a book production software, whatever it is that you're using, that sometimes you just don't see those things because you're just overlooking them because you looked at it so many times.
You're already filling in what it's supposed to be. Right.
Exactly. Yeah. Now, let's circle back a little bit. You mentioned the word style sheet. And for a lot of people who are new to this game, they may not know what you're talking about. So can you tell us a little bit more about what you mean when you say style sheet?
So a style sheet is something that it's a document that has everything that the author wants the manuscript to look like. So, for example, the style sheet for the publisher that I work with, they say I have to use Oxford commas, or I don't capitalize certain words, or there needs to be spaces in between ellipses, the periods and the ellipses. So, for example, think of like a style sheet as a specific version of a style guide, like a Chicago Manual of Style or an AP Style, those types of things. So a style sheet is unique to the author. So, for example, if I'm working with a romance writer, and I would say for my style sheet, I might say, remember that the hero has blue eyes, the color of ice chips, and they have ebony hair, and they have a broken nose that tilts to the right, and they have, one something is longer than the other. I mean, all sorts of things, things that you can easily forget or things that you just want to make sure that you have remembered as you're going through it. And so, and some style sheets are way more detailed than others, or some people don't even have a style sheet. So it's typically up to the editor or the proofreader to come up with the style sheet. So you'll start to see trends, so to speak, in the manuscript. And so you say, okay, so they like to capitalize this word, so I need to make sure that that's consistent. And the minute that it's not consistent, you have to query it or flag it and say, should this be capitalized, or is it okay that this is not capitalized? Because sometimes that's done intentionally. So but that's essentially what a style sheet is that you either you've either had it created, I'm gonna get it, or you create it yourself as you're going through the manuscript. So, but again, that's if some authors, especially if you're working with an author that has a lot of world building, they'll likely give you a style sheet because they want to make sure that, the editor and the proofreader knows that this country is in the East, that country doesn't eat meat, all sorts of things that you need to keep track of. So, like I said, it's like a smaller version of a style guide or a world Bible, series Bible, that type of thing. Or actually it could be a series Bible. All sorts of ways that you call it a style sheet, but basically just a document that says what needs to be included or not included in the manuscript per the author's wishes or the publisher's wishes.
Now, as someone who's doing this work, do you prefer to work off of the style sheet? So for those out there, like for me with my series, I have, a series Bible. Yeah. But also just because of the fact of how I write, I'm not an author who writes with that consistency of I'm writing every day. Mm-hmm. So I have basically a Bible for every book that I'm working on that tells me, all the details about my characters and stuff. So just like you just said, and whether I'm working with my graphic designers or whatever, I have different elements that I can pull out to make them aware of so that they can use it as a guide. I like working off of those because then I know I've given the people who are trying to help me create the best product they can create tools that allow them to do that so that they can flow as, they can flow in the manner that they need to. So does it make it easier for you, or is it, or does it matter? Are you able to quickly just build it, especially if you've worked with somebody over, a period of time and you get a feel for them, or do you, or does it make it easier?
For me, tools are helpful. So it's not a requirement for me. Because what I do is I just default to Chicago Manual of Style. So in a way, I already have a style guide, a style sheet. But if an author or a publisher wants, especially if they want things that are counter to Chicago Manual of Style, it would be helpful for me to have a document that I can go and refer to make sure that I haven't, gone to my default editing, proofreading, style habits. But that is, like I said, it's not a requirement. And to be honest, I've done this long enough that I tend to type up my own style guide. So even with the publisher that I work with, they have a style guide, but each individual project has their own internal quirks. And so for me, especially when you're doing copy edits, you're concerned about consistency. That for me, that's the main thing about copy, and like make sure everything is clean and consistent. So if it's counter to Chicago Manual of Style per se, but it's not or let me rephrase, if it's not exactly counter to Chicago Manual of Style and it's not counter to the publisher's style guide, then I'll let it go and just remind myself to make sure that it looks like this throughout the whole manuscript. But basically the style guide for the publisher or for your client trumps whatever main style guide you have been working with. So for example, if an author gives me a style guide and says, I don't want serial commas, I don't want Oxford commas, then regardless of what Chicago Manual of Style says, I have to make sure that the manuscript does not have serial commas. So basically, the client style guide trumps whatever major style guide is out there, for lack of a better term. But yes, for me, and I think for most, I'm just going to say for me, any tools that you can give me to help me make sure that the work looks like the way the client wants it to look is helpful. Because I can figure it out and make it work, but as long as I know that, I need to make sure that all of this is done, and I have a document that tells me to, remember to check for this, remember to check for that, that's always helpful. It'll still be a good product, but, anything to make it, as you said, take it to its final form. It has evolved to as much as it can evolve to.
Yeah, and I'll say, because, honestly, the thing is that as a person who is indie published, I think that one of the mistakes that I made when I first started is not communicating the vision that I wanted, right? And so the people that I'm trying to work with, they don't know me yet. They don't know my work yet. They haven't read every single thing that I've put out. And back then I didn't have a lot of work out. Even to this day, I still only have about, maybe 15, 16 pieces. So the whole thing is, for me, it worked having the style guides or the creative, sheets to be able to share, because what I found is that it allowed me to be able to know first what I wanted. Right. Because I had to see it myself, and then I could share it with them, and then they could be able to buy in and we could push forward. Because in the beginning, I wasn't happy with some of the with some of the cover art that I was receiving. I wasn't happy with some of the different things that I was getting. And I started to realize it's not necessarily all about the person doing the work. It's about the way I'm communicating to that person so that they can actually give me what it is that I'm looking to receive. So I would just caution anybody out there in the indie world, although it may not be something that everybody would require from you, that sometimes it helps you to flush out your own thing so that you know what you're doing. So that, because if you sent back some edits to me and it was completely all redlined and I'm like, oh my God, what just happened? What did she do? Right. And then you realize it's not necessarily the editor that you're working with. It's about the inconsistency in some of the work that you gave them to review, because you kind of started muddling up the picture that you sent to them. So yeah. So, I would just caution.
Right.
It can help you pull out a better picture. So now let's talk a little bit about copy edits and line edits. Because when I first started in this whole game, as a marketer, I use the word copy all the time.
Right.
I need to get some copy. I need to get some copy points. I need to blah, 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 copy. So when I started getting into this whole game of indie writing, line edits and copy edits were a thing for me. It's what do you mean? What's the difference in this? Line edits and copy edits. So let's talk a little bit about that. Can you help the listeners out there understand the difference between line edits and copy edits?
So I think a great way to think about it, and this is very simplified, but line edits or content edits or substantive edits, so many titles for that round of edits. But think of that as style and structure. How is the story unfolding? How is the story going to be cohesive? How is the story going to be marketable to the audience that you're trying to target? Does this story have a through line that is compelling from beginning to end? There are no low points in terms of sagging middles. That's a term that you hear a lot as you start to write. No confused beginnings or motivations, no clunkers for endings. You're basically doing a holistic shaping of the narrative. So you care about character, you care about setting, you care about the arc, you care about what is the end game for the author, for the reader when they finish reading your story, to me is holistic. Like how does this story work? That's what you worry about in the line, content, substantive edits round. When you get to copy edits, you're worried about, is the story clear? Is the story accurate? And is the story consistent within the manuscript that has been given? So basically, this part of the editing, copy edits, is mechanical. So do the physical parts of the story work? Are words spelled correctly? Are facts right? Is the grammar and stylistic, the physical sentence style consistent? The copy editor is not really thinking about, does this line of dialogue sound like this character? All they're worried about is, does this line of dialogue make sense grammatically? Or does this make sense in terms of it matches the consistency of the rest of the document? If it doesn't, then we'll flag it and say, perhaps you should change this, or we'll say, if this is not accurate in terms of what was established at the beginning of the story, or this character now all of a sudden has brown eyes when 3 chapters ago this character had blue eyes. That's what the copy edits are looking for. We don't care about, is this story marked? We care.
Now that helps a lot, because I'm going to tell you, because a lot of people, if you think about if you think about comprehensive edits versus copy edits, it makes sense.
Yes.
But for someone who has the background that I do, which is coming from working in marketing for over 20 years, where copy edits threw me.
Right. Everything is copy.
Everything is copy. And I don't know what you mean by copy edits. What are you talking about?
Right.
So it's like, so for those out there who are trying to figure out, do I need this part? Can I do this part myself? Do I have to pay somebody to do this? It's just one of those things. Make sure that you understand what each of these elements actually means, what's happening, so that
right.
you can figure out what works best, what you need most if you can't afford to have it all done.
Exactly.
So this is a question that I asked another editor friend of mine as well, someone who's done edits on my own work. You've worked across genres. I think you said you started in academia. So for you, this may not matter as much, but do you think it matters across genres who someone picks for their editing?
Yes.
Okay.
Not so much for proofreading, because proofreading is just making sure that everything looks the way it's supposed to look. And I will say that I'm glad that I got my start in an area of publishing that I didn't lend myself to. So, I'm not going out and say, oh, let me read textbooks for fun, but I had to learn how to, I think for me, learning how to do things in a standard way, which is what academia tends to lend itself to, helps you learn what rules you can break once you go into fiction and creative nonfiction. A lot of people, I'm not going to say that. I will say that there tends to be folks who just do fiction editing who might not be as grounded in standardized grammar and standardized spelling, so that if they try to do more academic, more formal based editing, they might trip themselves up. That doesn't mean they're bad. It just means that they have to unlearn some things that come more naturally when you have a bit more flexibility in fiction. So, the reason why it really matters when you're a content editor, when you're a substantive line editor, because again, that's the phase where you're trying to make sure that this book is going to be the most enjoyable and marketable for the target audience. If I like to read science fiction, I am probably not the greatest editor to choose if you are trying to write romance. Let me rephrase. I take that back. Romance kind of incorporates everything. If I am a science fiction editor, I am probably not the greatest person to talk to if my client is a thriller author. There are different beats, different expectations for that market that I would not lend myself to as easily or as, what is the word that I want? As intimately if I were a, thriller editor. That's the whole theory behind imprints. You have your science fiction imprint. You have your romance imprint. You have your commercial imprint. Well, commercial tends to be a catch-all, but still, it's a different type of market. Commercial is broader than a typical romance or a typical thriller imprint or a typical fantasy, high fantasy imprint and the like. So yes, for that level, you really want to make sure that editor has a good grounding and familiarity with the genre in which you write. It's not as essential in copy editing, but it helps. So especially when you are trying to make sure that things are accurate and factual, if you have some familiarity with the project that is being discussed, you will catch more things, or you'll be more sensitive to things that might be not true. For example, like spellings of names, of key names in the manuscript, or, years and dates and locations of things that if you didn't have any familiarity with, you would probably just ask, is this accurate? Or, you kind of get, the longer you do it, the more adept you are to listening to your instincts about certain things. Like, I'm not sure if this is it because it doesn't look right or it doesn't make sense. And I'll just say, I'll put a question mark and just confirm me that this is what you mean or what have you. But yeah, so I think for me, the order is substantive line edits. You definitely want to try to get an editor that is familiar, and not just familiar, but that's their home base of genre. Copy editing, great familiarity is a perk, but is not necessarily a requirement. You just really want to make sure that they're good at mechanical editing. And then proofreading, they just need to know grammar and spelling and things don't look right. That would be my priority, if in an ideal world.
I can support that. I can agree with that. I have throughout the years tended to gravitate toward people who write in fiction and who write in or who work in fiction as editors. Either they are working in women's fiction or they're working within romance. Mm-hmm. Because like I always tell people that my wheelhouse is pretty squarely women's fiction, but I do love, the element of romance. So, I wouldn't have that, probably that romance that everybody would expect where maybe the two main characters are on the same page from page one. Right. I'm usually working on each character in their own individual spaces, or sometimes the man in my story, can be a little bit of a secondary character depending on what that story is about, because I am focusing on that woman's journey. Right. So I do tend to like editors who work in that space, who can help me make sure that I'm shoring up that story in a way to where it really does make sense and it's going at the pace that I want. And I don't have just some unnecessary, sex scene or something, because I know people are going to expect a sex scene by now or something, Right. So I think your tip right there and your suggestions regarding those different elements of editing makes sense. If this is just going to be some basic grammar and whatever, okay, whatever. But, as you get into these other parts, having people familiar, it makes me comfortable.
Right.
So,
right.
So, so it makes me comfortable. It fits. It works for the stories that I've been telling. And as I continue to grow, we'll see what happens. But it does make me feel a little bit more confident when I release the book, that I feel like I've got a good team of people who understand the genres and who know me, who have been supporting me in creating the piece. Now this is like, this is, another thing that, we talked a little bit about, I guess in a holistic way, we talked about a little bit, but in general, one of the reasons I'm having this conversation with you is because of, the indie world and managing costs, right? So of course, like so many things, whenever I want to have these conversations, I like to do a little bit of research, take a look around, see what kind of costs people are talking about when it comes to these types of services. And of course, they are all over the board, right? Because there's that added value of you're working with this agency, or you're working with this person who also edits for this person and this person and this person. So are there any tips that you have when it comes to costs? Because, one of the things people always talk about is if something's too cheap, it may not be worth it. Or if it's too expensive, it's just like, whatever. So there's always kind of like that middle ground that everybody's always searching for. When it comes to costs. Now, for me, I think I go by word of mouth. If one of my friends is using them, I'm like, okay. If I go to an event and I have, learned of something new, someone new doing something different, I'm like, okay, let me see a sample of the work, and then I kind of base it off of that, and I also look at, if people have packages or deals, if I do so much work with them, can I get a, 10, 20% discount? If I do this, that, or the other. So without necessarily talking about specific numbers, do you have any kind of recommendations for people when it comes to cost?
I will say, try to avoid the super cheap quotes unless this person is just starting out as a proofreader or an editor, because their goal is to build their stable, which is everybody got to start somewhere. But if someone, the reason why I say this is because proofreading and editing is a lot of time. It's a lot of time. So if they're saying that they can proofread your 75,000 word manuscript for something that, basically you're like, well, why would I even pay you to do this? Then don't work with them again, unless they are trying to build their clientele. Because there are reasons that people I don't want to say that, but have special rates for what they offer. Maybe, it's an anniversary rate for when they started, or, especially what's happening nowadays, everybody's struggling. So we're going to do a very special rate to make sure that you can still put your book out, things like that. Those are fine. But, for me, I think one reason why people have or could possibly have rates so low is that they probably have too many clients, because there is such a thing as that. Because again, editing and proofreading is time consuming. And so if they're like, oh, I can get this to you, the turnaround time is, whatever. That's the reason why their rates can be so low. And if their rates are so low and their turnaround time is so high, then you really need to look at the quality of the work that they're providing. I'm not saying that this ipso facto means that their work is not good. I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is just to make sure that you are getting the appropriate value and that your vendor is not underselling their work, just trying to get a client. So for me, it's been a struggle to balance that, charging what I am worth and making sure that I can be affordable to a typical indie published author. Because there is a site that I go to all the time for me, just to make sure that I am being fair both to myself and to the client. And it's called Editorial Freelance Association. And the website is theefa.org. And then it's /rates. And that is a good place to look to see what kind of job you're getting or what the person is charging, so that you have basically what you should be budgeting for when you start to look for a service provider. Again, so if this person is a friend, or if this person is somebody who is starting to build their clientele, or this person is offering, special rates for whatever reason, definitely keep that in mind. Also, like you said, keep in mind word of mouth and reputation. So if they are highly recommended and their rates are not super high or super low, that's also good. But I think what's most important is word of mouth and reputation, because that will go a long way to making sure that whatever they tell you their service cost is going to be worth it to you in the end. And the other thing is that just because somebody comes highly recommended, it doesn't mean that they're a good fit for you. And it doesn't mean that they're still not good. It just means that for some reason you guys don't work out. But also when that happens, it's very, very important that you don't throw that person under the bus. Because, again, I think a lot of indie authors, it would be ideal if you had 2 to 3 people in your editing Rolodex, because somebody might be booked and you want to be able to work with somebody else. So there have been clients or potential clients that we didn't work out for one reason or another. But that's okay, because they said, I'm going to keep you in mind because I liked how, you did business. Or, for me, it's like, oh, I don't have time to work with you right now, but, definitely reach out to me when I should have an opening in, a few months. That you want to keep those lines of communication open, because sometimes it might just be this particular project is the incompatible fit, not you as the client or that person as the service provider. It's just like, finding a literary agent or finding a publisher. Sometimes it's not the project, and that's okay as well. But so I think that way. But the other good thing, like you said, is packages. So if a service provider is offering, a certain number, but you get maybe two rounds of edits with it, and then you get, an emergency phone call or a free consultation, something about your project, value-rich packages will go a long way. So the number might be a sticker shock upon first glance, but you see all that you're getting with it, and you're like, oh, that is worth it, or vice versa. Some people might just want to say, this is all I got energy for right now. I only have energy for, let's just say, a $50 manuscript critique for the first 100 pages. That's all I have the energy for. But if you sign up for this, you'll get a 5% discount on a longer, or a more expensive service because you're a return customer. Things like that, or even if you don't get a quote unquote special rate, you might get priority. They might be willing to bump you up if you have a quick turnaround project versus, another brand new client or something like that. So there are all sorts of things that you need to keep in mind when you're looking for an editor or a proofreader. And it's not just the price. You need to think of what does that price entail. Because I will say, just in life, the older I get, the more I'm willing to spend more money if I have less to do or less to worry about. So,
You and me both, so I'm going to co-sign that. And that's because you want to, I want to focus on one aspect and I don't want to do every single thing myself.
Right.
So, and then I feel like I get a better product,
right.
Because I'm not doing every single thing myself. So because I'm going to co-sign that one.
And the other thing is, think about it. You're paying this price some kind of way. You're either paying it with dollars or you're paying it with time. Think about what is more valuable to you. And so, if the time is more valuable to you, then for you to have time to do what you need to do, then thinking of what that equates to in terms of dollars to get that level of service that you would like is helpful. Because that, the longer that you're doing this, the more you're going to have to start thinking about it that way. Because you have a lot of energy when you start. You're like, I can do all of that. I can do my cover out, and I can format my book, and I can market. And no. As somebody who is a decade plus into this, I'm trying to get to the point where I can pay everybody to do everything but write the dang book. That's what I'm
You and me both. It's just much. I just want to have a team. I want to be like, hey, team, I want to be able to have this book, go to market on this date. This is where I'm at. This is our timeline. Let's get it happening.
And it's the best quality that I could put out at the time. I'm not worried about, I missed the period. Look, but did the people enjoy the book?
Yes.
Then that's all, because I am, as an editor, I always have to remind myself that, major newspaper publications always do a feature of all the things they missed throughout the week. It's because we're all human beings. You're not going to get everything right. This is an industry and a job that requires a lot of grace for yourself and for your service providers, because you can't have a quote unquote perfect book, but you can have the book be the best that it could possibly be at the time. And if that's the case, then that's the case. So that would be another tip I should tell your listeners.
I love that you said that, because that little piece that you said that you basically, I'm going to paraphrase it, was that you created the best product you could at that time.
At that time, yes.
Because hear me clearly, indie authors of the world, no matter how good that piece is, 2 months from now, 6 months from now, 12 months from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, you can make that book better. And if you pick that book up and you see those mistakes, forgive yourself. And as Savannah said, keep on trucking, give yourself that grace, because there's always something you could make better. And, as she said about newspapers, major publishers, anything, print, whatever it is, major movies. What was it? I didn't even watch Game of Thrones, but everybody was upset.
Starbucks
there was a Starbucks coffee cup, and then there was a water bottle. There's always something.
And guess what? They still won an Emmy for Best TV Series.
Come on, So give yourself the same grace to make a mistake, push on, learn from it, do the next one better. And when you're ready to take that book back or take it down and redo it, you polish that bad boy up and you put it back out there again. Because as an indie author, you can do that.
Or you don't, and just say, this is where I was at the time. And just have it be a thing. This is where I was in 2027.
Yes.
But now it's 2036. It's a brand new year.
Yep. And I'm not mad at that. I have a lot of friends who've done that, Now for me, because I've gone from publishers to self-published and whatever, when I have product come back, I have re-released it. But if I did that to every single book every 5 years, I'd never create new stuff.
Right.
So it's the same thing as even when you're writing that piece and just creating it and letting it go and sending it to an editor or doing whatever, you have to do the same thing with the finished product. At some point, you have to let it go so you can keep finished. On. Yeah, so you can tell other stories. I mean, there's so many stories that I have on my computer that, I'm like in various stages of production because I just have to let go of something in order to get to that, to finish it. So, this year alone, I'm looking at having like 3 or 4 different pieces come out. And I'm like, it's crazy because sometimes it feels like it's so much, it's so big, it's so overwhelming. Then other times you're like, oh, I can do that. Like you were saying earlier, like you have all this energy. I can do this, that, and that. Then you're like, woo. It's like, wait.
And then that exhaustion hits like, no, I can't do that no more.
Exactly. Who can I pay to do this? So it's crazy. Which brings me to a couple of more questions before we close out. One of which being time and the other being grammar software programs. Okay. So in general, for someone who is looking to pay someone to do proofreading or copy edits, I don't know if there's a standard rule, but is there any sort of rule of thumb that you could give us to kind of go by, like by page count or by word count? And then as you're thinking about that answer, I also want you to let us know how you feel about software programs like a Grammarly, and there's others out there as well. But, a lot of these programs, they have paid versions, which are supposed to be these higher up level, and you can put in detail that would say, this is for whatever type of reading or writing, so that it'll make allowances and supposed to help you spit out a better product. So tell us those things, a little bit about time and a little bit about grammar software programs.
For time, I think unless this is their full-time job, to allow for some grace in terms of what your expectations are for a turnaround time. So if you have, let's just say 75,000 word manuscript, and you say that I need this completely edited by 3 days from now, that's just not a thing that should ever happen. Not if you want a good editing job.
Okay.
But ultimately, the service provider will help you figure out what a realistic turnaround time is. Which means that you as an author need to be responsible for how your time management. So, if you put in the university, you're going to have a book out to the market in a month, and you don't have a single solitary word of that product written yet, do not wait until, day 27 to say, oh, it needs to be edited and formatted. That's unrealistic and not fair. But I will say, the turnaround times that I typically get from my clients are like 3 to 4 weeks. And that's pretty standard. And these are the projects that I have are about 40,000 to about 75, 80,000 words. And I am managing a completely full-time job as I'm doing this. So I have to manage my time also to make sure that I do the best job I possibly can and get some sleep and do the job that I have to do during the day and maybe squeeze in some time to do some writing of my own. But I will say, if you cannot meet a deadline, whether as the author or as the service provider, communication is key. The moment you realize this ain't gonna get done, as my grandma would say, the moment that this ain't gonna work out, that's when you email and say, oh yeah, so life is happening right now. Is there some flexibility in this deadline? And typically, it typically is, because what I think people give their best case scenario deadline, but typically people have some padded days in there. So, or at least let me rephrase, I think you should have some padded days in there. At least that's how I operate when I submit something for an editor. I say, this is the day I would like it back. But in my head, I've padded in, 3 or 4 days before it actually needs to be where it needs to be. So, yeah, depending on the length, depending on how extensive the work is needed, depending on how seasoned the service provider is, that can all play into how much time it will require to do the job. But I will say, please don't give people basically novel length works and expect a project done.
And again, I will co-sign that. Please.
That's just not fair.
And it's not creating a good relationship.
No, it's not.
With somebody who is now a part of your team.
Right.
So, and everybody knows that every once in a while, because if you're somebody like me and you do collections with other authors, or you do anthologies, and Savannah, you've done this, we've done this together, so sometimes you can get behind, a little bit, and then because you're trying to hit these dates and deadlines so that you are not the weak link in the group, so people understand sometimes that these things happen, but don't make that a part of your normal routine.
Exactly.
Because then you won't have the product that you really want to put out there.
Or a good partnership.
Yeah, you won't have a good partnership at all, So give yourself and your partner who's helping you, give yourselves both time to create the best product you can.
Yes, exactly. Yep. And then what was the second question? I'm sorry.
Yeah, no. Tell us a little bit about your opinions of grammar software programs.
I think they're helpful, but I don't think they need to be the final word of anything. Because who doesn't use their editor function, their spell check function in their, word processing software? You need to. You just do.
Yeah.
I will fully admit, I use Grammarly. I use Typely, but I don't pay for it. But it's helpful to use just to make sure. For me, what I typically do is I do a human copy edit first. And then I take it to Grammarly because there's something I've missed. And they will catch those things. Like they'll catch the subject-verb agreements that I didn't see as I was reading it because I'm a human being and I'm already correcting it as I'm, as I'm reading it, or I'm filling in what it should be. And so I'm interpreting it as correct. But then after that, I'll take it. And then after that, I put it back into the word processing spell checker. And then if I have more time, I might do one more final check with Typely. But the reason why you don't want to rely on those electronic grammar programs is because they're not human beings. And so they might not understand shades of words that you're trying to communicate. I'm a Southern Black woman, which means I have a very particular dialect, which is non-standard. So if you are writing fiction and your character is speaking non-standard English in particular, a Grammarly is not going to help you. There are just some things that a human person will know is right or is not right. That is why you, if at all possible, you should have another human being look over your product. Point blank, period. In fact, I just finished, I'm working on a project right now for my publisher. And while it's academic and not academic, it's nonfiction and it's more formal than not, this person's style is way looser than many of the clients that I have, or many of the projects that I've experienced. And because I am familiar with this loose voice, I know, for example, that folk is the correct word instead of folks or people or persons. He means folk. She means folk. She means to say what we not gonna do in this, nonfiction, project that I'm working on. This nonfiction, typically more standardized English writing project. If somebody just relied on Grammarly for that, they would have thought that construction was incorrect, but it's not. That was intentionally written that way. So I think it's when you're in your self-editing phase, those are great programs to use. But those are not programs that I would rely on for your final product. And frankly, I would not pay for it. But I'm also somebody who is very comfortable with editing. So I don't want to say people are silly for paying for it. That's not fair. Like I'm not going to be in people's pockets or in people's writing processes like that. But I will say you definitely still want to have a person look over your project, just because there are nuances that a program will never, ever get.
I can agree with that. Like, I don't pay for any grammar software program. I'd rather pay to work with an actual human, because then I can have a conversation and a discussion.
Right.
And so that I'm getting exactly what it is I'm trying to get from whatever it is that I wrote. So right. I agree with you. I don't have a problem with it, but like you say, Word has a program, Grammarly has theirs, whatever else you want to try to use. But I do like that human component, because writing is a very solitary thing. Mm-hmm. So having those different opportunities to be able to engage with another person are fantastic for me.
Right.
Because it allows me to come out of my writing hobby hole. Right. And to actually engage and have conversations. Because how else are you really going to have some really great people on the page if you're never really talking to people? So it gives me a great chance to continue to try to shape that story and to make it the best story I can. So, but I just really wanted to take that moment to ask someone who does edits and who does proofreading about how they felt about it, because a lot of people do use it as a substitute.
If that's all you can afford, like if that's all that you have budgeted, then it's better than nothing. Although I will say that the Microsoft Office Word has really stepped its game up in their quality of spell checking and editing. But, people got to do what they got to do. It's easy to say, this is what you should do, but like the real world does not operate on should. So, I'm not going to shame anybody who, at the time could only afford to buy a subscription to Grammarly or, buy the program Pro Writing Aid. I'm not gonna do that. But hopefully, as you're progressing in your career, you start putting that money that you pay for the subscription into more fine-tuned editing opportunities or services. So use it as a supplement and not as the final go. The more able you are is basically my advice.
Yeah, and I want to, again, co-sign. Microsoft Word has upped their game on their grammar.
Yeah.
But like you said, depending on what you can afford, which again is what we've been talking about this whole time, is what things people do need to be able to understand are components of self-publishing. But then from there, you do what you can afford to do what works best for you. All right. So now, for all of those people who are listening to this podcast, if they decide that the next step that they want to take is to reach out to you, Savannah, tell them how to do that. How do they find you on your social media, your website? Tell them again which services you offer. Tell us how do we connect with you?
So you can find me on Facebook by typing in Savannah J Frierson, and that's SAVANNAH J FRIERSON author. Type all that in and you will find me. Or I am on Twitter and Instagram at SJF Books. You can visit my website at sjfbooks.com for the author side, and for the editing and consulting and proofreading side, you can go to sjfedits.com. Or you can email me at editing@sjfbooks.com. Those are pretty much all the places where I hang out. Primarily Twitter. Right now, primarily Twitter. But if you hit me up on Facebook, I will find you. And I'll respond. Or if you hit me up on Instagram, most people don't, but I will respond. But definitely check me out in those 3 places. Those 3, I can count. Those multiple places. How about that? It's late.
Yeah.
And they're never my greatest subject.
Yeah, neither was it mine. Okay. All right. Well, like always, I want to say thank you, Savannah, for joining me, because this for me is always an interesting topic. I can talk about just the different elements of self-publishing, indie publishing forever. But when it comes to editing, it makes such a world of difference when you do have good people on your team who are helping you craft a story. And God knows, when it comes to proofreading, it was something that, literally was not something that I really understood the importance of until a few years ago, because as you say, it's such minor things that pop out at you. And especially as you get more into the world of things like ebooks, they just jump out, the formatting, the blank pages, and just crazy stuff that happens. So this is something that I really wanted to be able to share with people who are listening. So I really want to say thank you again for joining me. And, I hope that people who are listening, if they're interested in self-publishing, that they will reach out and find you on Facebook, go check out your website, find you on, hunt you down on Twitter, and really reach out and have a conversation with you, just to see what possibilities may exist in working with you as a partner. And for everyone who is listening in general, again, as always, I want to say thank you for taking a moment out of your day to stop by and listen and join us for this conversation.